to be here. Number one, to help Kia out. She's on a road of recovery. Her throat just hasn't figured it out yet. I am Rachel Lyons. I am the Archive and Cultural Heritage Director for the foundation. So if any of y'all are interested in the nerdy aspects of archives, we are over in the French Quarter in the old Saulnies Hardware Building on the corner of Toulouse and Dauphine. Now, to segue to this evening's events, I am here to introduce Megan Holt. Megan is a remarkable woman, and we are so glad to have her here to moderate tonight. When I think of this beautiful city and the beautiful people that create impact, Megan is a person who creates that impact with intentionality. As executive director of One Book, One New Orleans, Megan Holt is dedicated to fostering a love of reading and promoting community dialogue through literature. With a deep passion for education and cultural engagement, she has been instrumental in developing programs that celebrate diverse stories and voices within our community. Megan's expertise in literary scholarship, combined with her commitment to inclusive dialogue, makes her an ideal guide in our exploration of Economy Hall's history and its lasting impact on New Orleans and, of course, beyond New Orleans. Her contributions have not gone unrecognized in the state. In 2015, she was named Gambit Weekly's 40 Under 40, which somebody nominated me for once, but they didn't like it. And featured as one of New Orleans Magazine's People to Watch. In 2021, she delivered a TED Talk titled Becoming a Part of the Story. She shared her journey as an advocate for adult literacy. Most recently, in 2023, she received a Light Up for Literacy Award from the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities in partnership with the Louisiana Center for the Book. And in just this past carnival season, I love this part because I'm involved, but she reigned as the 2025 Queen Yolande in the Joan of Arc Parade. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you our esteemed curator, moderator for today's discussion, Her Majesty, Dr. Megan Holt.
Thank you. I was not expecting that introduction. Thank you all so much for being here, and hi to everyone watching online. I'm so honored to be here tonight. In 2020, One Book, One New Orleans chose New Orleans Griot, the Tom Dent Reader, as the book that would bring the city together through a shared reading experience. So I had the extreme pleasure of reading the Tom Dent Reader cover to cover 3 times. And I cannot tell you how incredible of a book this is. If you have not picked it up, please do so. It's available at your local independent bookseller. It's edited by Kalamu Ya Salam. And when he writes the introduction, he writes about having Tom Dent's gloves. He literally has a pair of the gloves that Dent wore. And he wears them while he's driving. And he writes this line that says, "As I am going places, Tom Dent is holding my hand." And as I am going places, Tom Dent is always holding my mind. I think about Tom Dent at least twice a day, and I'm so honored to be here for this lecture in his honor. And I am also very appreciative of the fact that there are still people in our community who knew Dent and knew him well. one of whom is here with us tonight to open up with a reading of Dent's poetry. So I'd like to bring out now Dr. Mona Lisa Saloy. She was the Louisiana Poet Laureate 2021 to 2023. She's an author, folklorist, Louisiana Folklife Commissioner, educator, and scholar of Creole culture in articles, documentaries, and poems about Black New Orleans before and after Katrina. She's currently the Conrad N. Hilton Endowed Professor of English at Dillard University. Her books are Red Beans and Ricely Yours. That one is her first book, and it won the T.S. Eliot Prize and the Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Award. Her second book is Second Lion Home. It's on New Orleans Black Creole culture. She has been published 5 times in the past year. And her third book, Black Creole Chronicles, was the One Book, One New Orleans 2024 selection. And it was also the Whitney Plantation Museum Book of the Month. She was named Louisianian of the Year 2024 in Louisiana Life magazine and is a delight to know. Mona Lisa, come on out.
Thank you, Megan, for that sweet and generous introduction. It is my pleasure and honor to be here. And thank you for the invitation. Baba Tom Dent, Thomas Covington Dent, is joined into the next life not only by his parents, but 2 of his dear friends, only very recently departed, Dr. Jerry Ward, author of poetry, scholarship, and a seminal anthology on Black literature, as well as a Katrina memoir, and most recently, Chikula Chajwa, activist, and part of the Free Southern Theater, part of Ashe, part of all of our community, who tirelessly acted and directed Tom's play, Ritual Murder, for decades. Both were his comrades, intellectually, spiritually, buddies. So to all 3, we say, go long so. And as a tribute to them and to Tom, I'll end with a Negro spiritual that is only found in one hymnal from 1915, but it's called Fare Thee Well, because you may have only heard it at Dillard University graduations, and I know Tom loved it. And he was actually a graduate of Gilbert Academy, part of Dillard University. So go long so, y'all. When Tom was preparing his master's thesis, he outlined his theory on poetry. He says, I've been working from the theory that my poetry is as much to be heard as to be read. My concern is not with literary language, but a language that people can understand, in forms rather than obscure. Poetry for Tom is always an act of communication. His models are Black music, letters, street talk, dialect, and private speech more than public speech. And that's from the New Orleans Griot, the Tom Dent reader. Another important quote. To know how we can better our condition, we have to know how we did it before. To know in what direction we must move, we have to know the details of our tortuous journey from whence we came to where we are now. History is not in the library. History was and is and will be our lives. That's Tom Dent. And in this was from an interview with Kalami Assalam, the editor of the Tom Dent Reader. He said, Tom decided to be more than a writer. He became a griot. It's actually a French word, but we know it's storyteller. And Kalamo quotes him, New Orleans griot is no honorary title nor a glib marketing phrase. It is a lifelong commitment to documenting and passing on the unique vibrancy of Black New Orleans culture. Tom's initial and short-lived formal training stands in contrast to the literary heritage he soon joined and extended, the oral storytelling tradition of the West African griot. And he says further, our task, the task of the griot, is waking people up. It is delicate and often misunderstood. And Kalamu talks again about how Tom groomed him into this life. But he says further that Tom taught him the griot way, to value our history and to relate to our contemporaries who were history makers themselves. And he says further, from time immemorial, most griots have done their important work in historical anonymity, yet the griot was nevertheless a relevant model for what it meant to be a writer in the 20th century. And now some Tom Dent poems. The first, for Cool Papa Bell. Hey, Cool Papa, I see a picture of you in your later years. Tall, black-skinned, withered, straight, proud. You must have been a streak of black gold flashing around the bases like some great African warrior misplaced. It is said you scored from first on a bunt against the all-white Major League All-Stars. You were 40 summers then, and they wanted to know how you did it. Was it magic? Was it voodoo? Was it a streak of segregation? Was it special compensation for national mental inferiority in the labs of Stanford? Was it something that only happens in a colored ball? A Saturday night mutation gone insane in the white man's game? You must have been the genius black musician of Daho Sippy, carving his own instrument. So now at 70, they parade you out from your job as janitor at St. Louis City Hall and place you in the retroactive Hall of Fame. And forgive us if we don't cry, Cool Papa. Forgive us if we don't get excited for you. We share the night of that memory, those memories, all the bitter years and buried triumphs, because you did it, man, and no one can take that away. Bitter years, bitter triumphs. Tom Dent. This one is called 10 Years After Umbra, and the Umbra workshops were co-founded by Tom. And I read him years before I met him. The Umbra workshop readers they published the young Alice Walker and Sonia Sanchez before they were famous. And Ishmael Reed was there, then Leroy Jones, who became Amiri Baraka. It was formation of the Black Arts Movement. This is called 10 Years After Umbra by Tom Dent. We'd seen our minds reach out, touch fingertips, musics, crawl in like lazy smoke on Friday nights, taste the wine, and leave us a whiff of real road. We had seen our fingertips recoil, our minds reel from the impact of our tongued knives. But then, we were naked then, and we stripped our souls easy as the sun rose, and what went on in the tenement prison was something in us, bursting free like a flash fire. Do you, too, know how the drag of too many jammed years feel? Stanley's fades into a dream, and so with our touching or our hurting. As for me, the dirt roads of Mississippi are a long way from anywhere. But then the sun will rise, just as easy tomorrow over this black earth. Join me there. And I'm going to end with something Tom loved to do. In the Black American literary tradition and in musical tradition, we have something called call and response. We do it at church. God is good. Amen. So Tom wants you to say after every stanza, I'm going to point to you, that show is right, Tom. Ready? That show is right, Tom. Here we go. And it's called an audience participation poem, or as I would like to call it, That sure is right, Tom. New Orleans isn't a place where everyone is always late, where no work gets done, where meetings planned for 8 p.m. have to be called for 7 p.m., where some people never make it to where they're supposed to be at all, where dinner is at 10 p.m. is in order, not to mention the hot sausage sandwich at midnight. That sure is right, Tom. New Orleans, where we are endlessly assaulted by rain, flooding, and pestilence in the form of roaches, land-based and flying, and mosquitoes, and we consider that normal? That sure is right, Tom. New Orleans, where people move from elsewhere and complain every day about how much they hate this backwards place, but never leave. Why don't they move to Houston or Atlanta, where life is more sane and the economy is booming? Get out. That sure is right, Tom. New Orleans, that strange place where in the name of progress, interstate expressways were built right smack through the center of the city, destroying all the houses on either side because of the rumbling heavy traffic. You would have thought someone had better sense than that. That sure is right, Tom. And why do foreigners from New York call us Cajuns? I want to know. Or our cuisine Cajun? Just because one fat, vainglorious chef from Vermilion Parish dropped some redfish into a pan and forgot to take it out before it burned, and then sold it to New York as a delicacy? Cajun food is swamp food, alligators, rattlesnakes, and sausages made from unmentionable animals or whatever. We don't eat that, do we? That sure is right, Tom. And as for us in the Crescent City, what happens when the moon is full? When the moon time creates havoc with the 90% water in our blood, not to mention the water throughout the city, plus the river and the lake, and we start crashing into each other on the streets, others chasing after demons, and sex fiends come out of their holes to seek prey and worse. Isn't it a time to stay home, lock our doors, and slam our shutters closed? That sure is right, Tom. That sure is right, Tom. And just to say a farewell. Fare ye well, fare ye well, fare ye well, fare ye well. If I never, ever see you anymore, fare ye well, fare ye well, fare ye well, fare ye well. We'll see you on the other shore, fare ye well. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Mona Lisa. And as she mentioned, Tom Dent wasn't just a poet. He was a playwright, he was an essayist, he was a fiction writer. He was writing about the freedom trails and civil rights. And so when you start thinking about curating the Tom Dent lecture, what do you do? Because he was so many things. And the place that really brings together what he was writing about in terms of activism, in terms of literary arts, in terms of music, that place is Economy Hall. And I am so excited to introduce our panel for this evening, who will talk about Economy Hall and the many, many ways that its legacy lives on in our community today. So in alphabetical order, because that was the only way I could figure out how to do it, we welcome David Cunnion, who currently serves as the curator for the New Orleans Jazz Museum and the music curator of the Louisiana State Museum, where he has curated exhibits on Louis Armstrong, early jazz in New Orleans, women in New Orleans music, a history of New Orleans drumming and drummers, painters Emily Reese and Noel Rockmore, Louis Prima, Professor Longhair, Pete Fountain, among others. Welcome. You can hear David on WWOZ's Freaknologist's Lunatique Kitchen Sink program on Tuesday nights at 10 p.m. Next up, Fatima Sheikh. She's the author of 7 books, most recently the American Book Award winner and Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities 2022 Book of the Year, Economy Hall, The Hidden History of a Free Black Brotherhood. The State Library Center for the Book named Sheikh its Louisiana Writer Award recipient for 2021 for, quote, outstanding contributions to Louisiana's literary and intellectual life exemplified by a contemporary writer's body of work. Welcome, Fatima. Next up, we have Dorotha Dodie Smith Simmons, who was born in Benton, Mississippi on May 30th, 1943. Dodie joined her sister in the Youth Council and in 1960 became an active member of the New Orleans Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, participating in sit-ins, picketing, and was jailed several times. In addition to her civil rights work, she also was a founding member of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival and served as office manager, associate producer, traditional jazz coordinator, and financial director, among others. We'll get into all of this soon. And last but not least, Dr. Michael White is among the most visible and important New Orleans musicians today. He's one of the few native New Orleanians to continue the authentic traditional jazz style. He's noted for his classic New Orleans jazz clarinet sound, for leading several popular bands, and for his many efforts to preserve and extend the early jazz tradition. I'm not reading their full bios because that would take the whole time we have, and we want to get into the discussion, so welcome to our panelists. Okay, oh. Check, check. Yeah, it's on, cool. Okay, before we really get into it, let's do a little terminology. So Fatima's book, there's some terminology that I'm going to use that she uses in the book as well. So when I say Economy Hall, I am talking about the building. When I say economy, I am talking about the society that founded the building. And when I say economistes, I'm talking about the members of the society. So that's what she uses in this incredible history of Economy Hall, and that's what we'll be using today. So let's get into it, y'all. So for everyone, we're going to start out with a quick icebreaker, which is, tell us about the first time you heard about Economy Hall and what you first learned. I will let you guys answer in whatever order you want.
I'll break the ice. The first time I heard about Economy Hall was sort of in my neighborhood, somebody in my family. You know, I asked my dad. He had maybe heard of it, but he hadn't been there. I asked Mr. Dookie to find out whether he had played there, and that was about all I knew. All I knew that it was a jazz hall. I went to Hogan Jazz Archives first to see what was going on, what Economy Hall was, but I didn't really know much about it at all.
The first time I heard about Economy Hall is when I started working at Preservation Hall, and that was in 1965. I knew of it as a dance hall where a lot of the musicians that played at Preservation Hall worked, and about the dances they did. And later on, as you hear, when I started working for the Jazz and Heritage Festival, which I'm one of the last of the founders of the festival, I got to name the hall Economy Hall. And it's been that way since 1983.
I first heard about Economy Hall when I started doing research on early jazz at the Hogan Jazz Archive at Tulane University. And I found out that it was one of several popular halls that featured early jazz music, and some of them had similar interests. And then I heard about Economy Hall from a lot of older musicians. I was fortunate enough to, when I started playing, meet, know, and play with more than 36 musicians born before 1910. Some of them went back to the 1890s. And they, some of them used to play in Economy Hall, and they talked about it. So that's where I first heard it.
Dodie, thank you for naming Economy Hall, because at Jazz Fest, because I think that is how I first heard of it, is going to the Economy Hall tent. Or it was when I first moved to New Orleans, when I started working at WWOZ, I think someone happened to mention it because OZ was in Armstrong Park, and someone said, oh, it's, you could almost throw a baseball to where Economy Hall was, and I went, what was Economy Hall? So those are the kind of how I figured out about it.
Thank you all so much. And like you, I also first heard about it when I was at the Jazz Fest under the Economy Hall tent. And I'll be honest, I didn't know much about it until Fatima's book came along and righted a whole lot of wrongs that we didn't know about. So I was wondering if you could just tell us about what brought you into writing about Economy Hall and the process of bringing this book into life.
Well, as I said, I didn't know much about Economy Hall, but we had the journals of the Société d'Économie in the house, right? My father's friend was one of the last members of the Economy Society, so he was charged with emptying the Economy Hall of all of the things that the society had, the furniture, and they were going to sell the hall. So he had all of these books that were journals, minutes of meetings that had been going on in the Economy Society that he was throwing away. My dad was interested, and they were written in French. Nobody was interested, and my dad was interested because he was studying French. So Mr. Wilderson, who was his friend, put them on the dump truck. My dad got them off the dump truck, brought them home. They sat in our closet for 50 years or so. I had been a writer by then. I had grown up by then, because he must have brought them in around the 50s, couldn't have been the late 40s, had to be the early 50s, because I remember it. By that time, I had written a few books, and I was looking for something new, so I went into the closet and found these journals. I saw that the journals began in 1836, and the last minutes were in 1948. Right, so, well, I can't say the last minutes, the last piece of a document. It wasn't minutes, but the last document was 1948. And I also saw that the people that were when I flipped through, I couldn't understand all of the French, but what I could understand was I saw the names of people in my neighborhood, Desdunes and Rousans and, Bonaris, and I saw people's names in there, so I started reading, and that's really what got me started. It was sort of like in my house, something's in your house, you got to do something with it, And then it was in my neighborhood, and I sort of knew my neighborhood. I knew a little French. I knew it was sort of a dying language in my neighborhood, and so I guess I had to do it, So that's what I did, yeah.
It's so wild to think that those journals were literally rescued off the back of a truck, and really makes you think about what in our history we've lost just to random dump trucks.
Random dump trucks. Well, nobody was reading French really at that time. Nobody was really reading French. It wasn't popular, and I didn't, I heard it, but I didn't really learn it till high school. People used to speak it, but it was not literate French really. So, yeah, I guess people were saying, well, this is no value. This has no value. Let's throw it away.
So, Ms. Dodie, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on what you touched on a minute ago, which was the fact that when you got the chance to name a tent at the Jazz Fest, you named it Economy Hall. Why did you choose Economy Hall and want to preserve its legacy in that way?
Well, in 1983, when I was the coordinator for traditional jazz at the festival, and we performed on stages. 1983 was the year that I got the tent. And when I got the tent, it was during the same time that the festival lost its sponsorship. Schlitz Beer was the sponsor for many, many years, and when they pulled out, we had no sponsor. So I really wanted to call the hall Cheapskate Hall, which was what some of the musicians called the hall. And I asked, I think it maybe was George Lewis, why was it called Cheapskate Hall? He said because they paid so little, so I had to go with Economy Hall. Because, like I say, we had no money, I thought of the economy, and that name has stuck. When Alan Jaffe, who ran Preservation Hall, died, Quint wanted to rename the tent the Alan Jaffe tent. And I told him no, because Alan would have wanted that. So it has remained Economy Hall. We have had sponsors, but it was sponsored, Economy Hall sponsored by this person or that company. But we are still Economy Hall to this date. And also, in 1983, this gentleman sitting next to me, Dr. Michael White, had been playing in the tent with a trio. And every year he would ask me for money to have a regular band. Well, it was in 1983 that he was one of the first musicians to play in Economy Hall with a 7-piece band.
Thanks to Dodie.
And thank you for segueing us into the next question I had, which was for Dr. White. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the music that's played at the Economy Hall tent and how that goes back to the Economy Hall founded by the economists?
Well, you know, Economy Hall tent is set up by Dodie was for traditional jazz. And, you know, most of what happens in there is traditional jazz. Every now and then they put in something else for whatever reason, which we won't go into. But we try to get as much authentic jazz and the best of traditional jazz that there is in town from the local musicians. We used to have a lot of people that came in from foreign countries, would sort of make pilgrimages sort of to New Orleans because they like to see and hear the older musicians. But when the older musicians died out, and then some of them also died out, you didn't have as many foreign bands coming in town. And so it got really too expensive to think about visas and travel and all of that. So they decided, you know, that most of the traditional jazz and Economy Hall tent would be local musicians. But there are guest spots, and every day there's a special guest. And it has evolved to the point where sometimes the special guests are concerts that feature music like, for example, the Louis Armstrong Hot 5 and 7. This is the centennial year of the first of those early recordings, and they were of seminal importance in the history of American music. So we're honoring those, and you know, we're like we do a local band with that. This time, the featured musician is going to be Nicholas Payton, who is known as a great modern jazz trumpet player, but he grew up playing traditional jazz. And so, you know, we have people like that, but sometimes there are other guests and guest stars. You know, sometimes people that have a name will, you know, bring in people from different places. But most of the music, it's brass bands and traditional jazz groups. Some singers, we might feature related music like blues, like Bessie Smith or 1920s style blues, things like that. but also the music of special musicians like Sidney Bechet, Johnny Dodds, Jelly Roll Morton, things that you don't normally hear in traditional jazz circles.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad that you just spoke a few of those names because they're actually on the walls at this new exhibit at the Jazz Museum. So the Jazz Museum actually just opened up an exhibit on Economy Hall, I believe 3 weeks ago? Is that about right?
Sure,
Sure, yeah. 3 weeks ago?
maybe 4.
Right, so there's pictures of Pops Foster and King Oliver and Kid Ory on the walls. And there's also pieces of Economy Hall. There's part of the bandstand, there's some piano keys, there's tickets from the dances. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about why you felt compelled to put out this exhibit and some of the things that we could look forward to if we went to see it.
Well, the exhibit builds on what Fatima did at Xavier University that I think is still up.
It's still up.
Still up at Xavier. And we kind of just, we're looking for something to replace what on the Serbian musician we had there. And a couple of people had seen the exhibit at Economy Hall and said that would be a great idea. And so I started talking to Fatima, and I started looking around for what we had for this. And we had a fair amount we had photos of folks who had played there, and a couple photos of actually the hall. And then I worked, all of the kind of archives in New Orleans work together, and we borrow things from each other and things. And I started looking at the Historic New Orleans collection, who has all of Bill Russell's collection and things that he collected, which is, to say the least, vast. Thank goodness for that too. And the Historic New Orleans collection had the piano keys and some of the tiles that literally Bill Russell, when they were tearing down Economy Hall, went there and pried, I think, the tiles out of the sidewalk kind of thing, and grabbed the piano keys and whatever he could find. So we were able, they loaned them to us, and we put them in. And we also, added a couple things of folks who had also performed there. We have A.J. Piron, who, was a music publisher and composer. We have his violin bow, and A.J. Piron, his uncle was the president at one point, right?
His uncle was the president of Economy Hall.
Yeah, his uncle was president. So we put that in there, and then we were trying to figure out what to do because we really wanted to have one of the minutes books. And Fatima did not, and I don't think they should travel either, so I don't hold this against you. But it ended up that the University of New Orleans archive has one of these books, and they were lucky and they were nice enough to loan this to us. So you can actually go and see one of the minutes books that are there. And for those of you who have read the Economy Hall book, you read about the minutes books, but to see them, to actually see it is an entire other thing. They are gorgeous. I don't know where these guys had such great handwriting, because I went through it. There are no mistakes. I mean, I write a paragraph and I cross out 4 words because I've misspelled them or my handwriting's abominable. None of that I saw in these. And they've got kind of little artistic doodles and stamps and stuff. They're gorgeous. So we got that from UNO and kind of put it all together with Fatima's work and a couple things that I wrote, but mainly her writings and stuff like that. So.
Well, one thing I'd like to say about souvenirs that Bill Russell collected, the banister that was in front of the stage, that is in the back of Preservation Hall. When he gave it to Alan Jaffe, it was used one time on the record cover of Johnny Weeks' band, standing outside on the balcony of Preservation Hall. Before Jaffe moved, when he lived in the back of the hall, the railing is still there, which was his bedroom. So Economy Hall pieces still exist.
Which is what I would say, if any of y'all know of any of these pieces that might be out in the wild, let me know. I would like to know where those are. So.
Which is so cool. That's one of the points you make in the book is the history's out in the wild. We just got to go find it somewhere.
Yeah.
Oh, I said that Fatima, one of the points she makes in the book is the history is out there. It's out in the wild, and we are finding it in plain sight every single day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to talk, if I may, to follow up with some of this that they're talking about. You know, Economy Hall was built in 1857, and it stood for more than 100 years. So the banisters and all the pieces that they're talking about were from a 100-year building by the time the place came down. So the economy, right, the people who the society started in 1836. So it was about 20 years later that they built their own hall. They had a building, they had a double house across the street, but then they decided to build a grand hall that would have a theater and a bandstand and meeting rooms. So it was used, if I may say so, it was used for many other purposes before we got to jazz. It was used as a meeting hall for a society that was like a benevolent society. It was used for voter registration in the 1860s. It was used for meetings of other groups during the Reconstruction period. There were many other groups that came there because they were trying to organize and make societies like this mutual aid society. So it had a long history before we even got to the hall, before we got to jazz. And I tend to think that some of the activities Economy Hall, one of the reasons Economy Hall is so famous is because all sorts of people met there. German labor unions met there, the cigar workers, the Cuban cigar workers met there. Everybody who had an organization came to this big hall and rented out the hall for their meetings. So it had a large reputation. I think jazz, that's why people would come there to listen to music, right? Because people knew the place.
Yeah, and anyone could rent out the hall. At a certain point, it was like $5 to rent out the hall, and $250 a police officer.
Right, exactly.
I don't know why they would have to have
$20
police
for a
officers. But yeah, in fact, music went on there before jazz.
Right.
They had dancing was always popular in New Orleans, and dances, and so they gave dances where they featured music like waltzes, polkas, mazurkas, marches, and things that were pre-jazz marches, before jazz. And of course, when jazz came along, it perfectly suited the hall and sort of the freedom-minded, liberal-minded people, because the characteristics of jazz are also freedom-based and democracy-based, which parallel the desires of a lot of the membership.
Absolutely. And one of the things that really struck me, and I'm so glad you mentioned it costs $5 to rent the hall and $250 for a policeman, because one thing that you do in the book that struck me over and over again is you would write the economy took up $20, and that was a week's wages for a fireman. I'm making up this, right? But she does this throughout the book. She'll name an amount, and then she'll say that was this many days' wages for this kind of laborer in this time period. And I'm wondering why you chose to point that out continuously throughout the book.
It had to do with math, y'all. I'm not good at math. but no, it really had to do because I looked at metrics for comparable things, like, you know, what a dollar would be worth in a different time. And I found so many different metrics, like there were wage metrics, there were cost of living metrics, there were grocery metrics, so they were all different. So I went actually back to Labor Department records to see, for example, what a carpenter made in this particular year, and then I would match that to something, so I could say a carpenter would make this much in a year. Right? There was something they did that somebody, it was like a year's wages or 3 years' wages for somebody. Like their first ball, because Michael was talking about the dances. The first dance they had, it was not at the Economy Hall, but it was, I believe, at the Washington Ballroom at that time. It was 1841, and they made $369 profit in 1841, so which was a considerable amount of money. These were very well-heeled members that started the organization, And near the end of the 19th century, well, a lot of those rights were being taken away. Their rights to make a living, to earn a living, to have savings were being taken away. So they actually had more money in that society at the beginning of the 19th century than they had at the end of the 19th century, or the 20th century for that matter.
And what also struck me about the society was just the spirit of brotherhood among its members. There's this anecdote in there on page 195, if you have your book. And the secretary, Bogil, needs glasses. And so the members take up a collection and they buy the guy a pair of glasses and they present them as a gift at the meeting of the Economy Hall. And he puts them on, and he's the secretary, so he kind of needs them to take the minutes. And he's so moved, he breaks out into this spontaneous poem. Can you talk a little bit about that spirit of brotherhood among the members?
Well, one of the things, as Michael said, it had that democratic idea about it because what they believed was that any one of their members could come there and make a case for something, and they would have a debate, right? So they didn't have to agree on everything in the beginning, but they would have civil debates. So Bogil, who was the secretary, needed the glasses. He was also a school teacher. He had his own school in 1840 down in the Marigny. So he fancied himself a poet too. So when he got the glasses, he gave this quatrain, this poem about how he could see better. It would advance his education, right? So it was a beautiful little poem. But they definitely did consider themselves brothers. They called themselves brothers, right? There was a fight between two guys once. One hit the other on the street, and they brought it to the Economy Hall, and the fella said, I am still smarting from your insults and from your Malacca cane. So he had hit him with his cane. And the other one got up and apologized, and they hugged each other. It was all written. Bogil wrote everything. Their hearts were like one. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. So, thinking about the book, there are so many little fun facts in the book. And one of the fun facts is how the brass band got its name. On page 338, for those of you who are following along in your readers. And you talk about how we say brass band because there was no English term or no French term for what was happening on the stage. Can you talk a little bit about that for the audience?
Well, I'll talk a little bit, and then I'll defer to our jazz experts over here. They were just taking the minutes. The minutes were in French till 1926. So from 1836 to 1926, they were writing in French. But it was, I think, in the 1870s that they wanted to hire a brass band because everybody was going around with brass bands when they'd have a party or something. They'd march through the street with a brass band. But there was no English. I mean, there was no French equivalent to it. So you see all of this French writing, and then you see brass band. But Michael, you could talk about how the brass bands came into the jazz world.
Well, brass bands were popular. There was a brass band craze all over the world in the 19th century that increased with time and with improvements in manufacturing brass instruments. And brass bands were in cities and towns across America. Everybody had brass bands. And in New Orleans, because of the celebratory history of the people and the different types of functions, parades for everything, as we do today, parade for everything. So you had a wide need for marching bands, and of course they come from Europe military tradition to play in parades. But in terms of New Orleans, there were bands, even marching bands that, like for example, the Battle of New Orleans. During the Civil War, there was a massive, at the end of the Civil War, massive concert given here with a brass band with so many musicians in it that I don't even want to say how many because it's hard to believe, but hundreds of musicians that they brought in. And that was always a popular thing. But when jazz came along, again, this was music you could parade in the streets. It was a music that inspired freedom. It spelled out freedom. It acted out freedom in the music. You could hear it, you could feel it, you could dance along with it, you could create your own dances that kind of paralleled and inspired the music as well. So that was important. And a lot of the brass bands also had a dance band component. Some of the brass instruments, some of the brass players played string instruments and would make smaller bands that, would play inside of these dance halls like Economy Hall. And increasingly, jazz became a very popular music there for the membership, but also for people that rented the hall to give dances. And so you had some of the most important musicians in early jazz played in Economy Hall. The guy that's credited by a lot of older musicians as being one of the first to develop or start what became known as jazz, Charles Buddy Bolden, the legendary uptown cornet player. Even though much of his work was uptown, he also played in Economy Hall. And of course, then later generation musicians who helped to develop the music. Some of them never recorded and were only legends, like Chris Kelly and Buddy Petit. I played with some of the musicians, like bassist Chester Zordis, who was born in 1900, was a great friend of mine and a great, great bass player. He used to tell me about playing in Economy Hall, played with Buddy Petit, and they would talk about the dances and the different, the different bands that played there. But also people like King Oliver, Louis Armstrong, Kid Ory, they played there as well. And in fact, Louis Armstrong is said to have been hired to play on the riverboats when they came and heard him at Economy Hall playing with Kid Ory's band. Kid Ory was a very smart businessman. He's known in the history of jazz as the foremost progenitor of the tailgate trombone style and as the composer of songs like Savoy Blues and Muskrat Ramble. But Kid Ory was also a pretty smart businessman, and to say that he kind of came from the country, he was pretty smart. He would rent out Economy Hall on Monday nights, which was the slowest night of the week. And he would give dances there, but he always had a hot jazz band with great musicians, and that would attract crowds. But to keep down the competition, Kid Ory would rent out not only Economy Hall, but the next hall, Cooperators Hall. And he would close Cooperators Hall so that everybody would come to Economy Hall. And if it got really crowded, he would open up Cooperators Hall and have a second band there. So Kid Ory was smart, made a lot of money.
That's how you do it. So I'm so glad that you mentioned a few of the people that you had played with, Dr. White, because I've been listening to your live album obsessively to prepare for this panel. If you guys haven't gotten it, please go get the album. It's 5 songs, 3 are composed by you, 2 are composed by other people. And what you hear when you hear that album is just a dialogue between the past and the present. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how that music is influencing your compositions.
Which album is it?
It's the live album.
Oh.
It's got
I'm on about 100 albums now.
Yeah.
I have about 15 in my own name, so I never know. And I never listen to them, so I don't know. Because when I do, I always hear stuff and go, oh, I could have done that better. But, it's an interesting thing. Being one of the younger musicians playing traditional jazz, I was very fortunate to, when Dodie helped me out, playing at Jazz Fest, I had a chance for the first time to play some of the music I was hearing on record, but nobody was playing. We played in the trio. We played stuff like Jelly Roll Morton trio songs. Nobody local was doing that. No one was doing that stuff. And we got to do that, and that helped me quite a lot. But what I came to realize, I talked to a lot of the older musicians about the history of jazz, about the events they played, and they taught me how much jazz is a part of life in your spirit. The one thing that they all said was develop your own sound and your own expression. And at the time, I didn't know what it meant, but eventually I came to figure out jazz came along at a time, 1890s, which was a very difficult time racially in America and especially down in the South. Jim Crow laws coming along, racial violence against African Americans, the idea of, even today, 2025, we're still talking about issues like Black Lives Matter. You can imagine in the 1890s, people were fighting for voting rights, freedom, identity, to keep from being invisible. And one of the things that having your own individual sound in music gave you was visibility and a certain type of freedom. And that's why it was so important for those musicians. If you listen at early jazz musicians, no two of them sound alike. They all have individual personalities. Some of them were well trained, took private music lessons and were good music readers. Some of them were completely self-taught and never read music. But the one thing they all had in common was they were individual personalities with individual expression. And that's a concept that really kind of got lost more and more with each generation of jazz. It's not to talk about, good or bad, not at all. But that whole idea of, a trumpet player sounds like, if you listen today, a lot of trumpet players sound like trumpet players. But when you heard Kid Sheik Cola play, he sounded like Kid Sheik Cola. When you heard Kid Thomas Valentine play, he sounded like Kid Thomas Valentine. Nobody else sounded like that. When you heard Percy Humphrey play, he sounded like Percy Humphrey. So I realized that for the musicians in early jazz, having your own sound was a way of gaining freedom, in a sense, and of establishing visibility in an invisible society. So it was a very, very important thing. Yeah. So, yeah. I forgot what I was going to say.
To you, Michael. Don't you think the reason? Oh, I'm sorry. I think the reason for that is why Kid Sheik sound like Kid Sheik and why Percy Humphrey sound like Percy Humphrey. And today, like you say, a trumpet player sound like a trumpet player. I think during the time of Kid Sheik and Percy, there was no such thing as a radio or a phonograph or records. Young people today have access to that. So Kid Thomas didn't have a record to play to say, oh, I would like to sound like him. So he had to play like himself, which is unfortunate that young musicians cannot listen to records and still be themselves.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because they don't teach you in music schools about how to have an individual personality.
Right.
But to answer the second part of your question, I eventually came to realize that traditional jazz music is not just a repertoire of old songs like a lot of people think. It's a style, and that style can be used for endless creativity today. And along with that, and of course, this is not any light bulb moment. This evolved over many years. But eventually I realized that I lived and my generation lived things that King Oliver didn't see, Louis Armstrong didn't see, Jelly Roll Morton didn't see, and we could incorporate the elements of our lives into making our own expression with traditional songs, but also to create new music. For example, 1960s civil rights movement, political turmoil, the counterculture movement, Hurricane Katrina, COVID, all of those things create quite a lot of emotion. And that emotion can be used for creativity in any style of music or any art, but why not in traditional jazz? So that's been the fuel of my creations and writing music. And I write now, I don't know why, one morning I woke up and I write every day, all day, anytime. I never did that before in my life. I think it's because I've gotten old. My mind must be going. But so it's saying, get it out now before it's too late. But I think about new songs that are based on a lot of things. Earlier today, I did a program at the Mint. I played a little bit. And as we were sitting in the back room, somebody said something, and just the thing they said brought up a musical idea. And I said, oh, I got to write that down. So I started writing that down. I didn't finish it yet, but I have that idea.
So speaking of your style, I see you brought a little friend with you. You want to give us a... A little sample?
No, this is just a prop.
Just a prop? Okay.
So let me just say this. They talked about a lot of the different types of songs in the jazz era that they played in Economy Hall. Of course, they played all the standard types of jazz songs. Marches in the jazz style, rags from ragtime, original jazz songs, pop songs, old folk songs. And Johnny Dodds talked about them playing blues. King Oliver played blues. And they said they played the blues real soft, but real low down, when people would like to get close and slow drag dance to them, and you could hear their feet shuffling. And so, you know, I was...
Their belt buckle.
Yeah. She says, shining their belt buckles. Okay.
I know, Michael, it's a little early for playing that kind of music.
That would be a good name for a song, actually. Shine my belt buckle.
Well, is that where Slow Drag got his name from? Because he was a great dancer?
Yeah, I think so. Slow Drag Papajo, who was a great bass player, his nickname was Slow Drag because he supposedly was a great dancer. But let us try for just a second to kind of, as best as we can, recreate that kind of feeling. So I'm going to need, I don't have a band, so I'm going to need a little help from you all to recreate the rhythm, which could be the rhythm of the dancer's feet or the rhythm of the band. I need you all to clap slow, and I'll make up a blues song over that. So the tempo is like 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. I used to do this with my classes.
Thank you so much, Dr. White.
So, you all, thank you. You all did great. You'll be paid at the Economy Hall rate right after.
So I want to thank you not only for giving us a little sample, but also for bringing up the idea of the music connected to movements like the civil rights and this struggle for freedom. One of the things that Fatima writes about in the book, and this is especially poignant on pages 274 and 292, she writes about the way that the economy was an incubator for early civil rights movements during Reconstruction, and particularly the violence that happened with the Mechanics Institute, and there was some police brutality that went on. Then the economy members were also very active in registering people to vote and talking about full citizenship and rights. And it resonated so much, Ms. Doty, with the work that you were doing with CORE and especially what happened to you in Macomb. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what economy did in sort of the Reconstruction era, and then maybe you riff off of that.
Well, when I got involved in the civil rights movement, I wasn't aware of Economy Hall. because I went from civil rights to working at Preservation Hall, founding the festival, working for the festival. But due to all of the hard work that Fadiman has put into producing this book, I never knew about the Mechanic Institute. Now we have a marker. There were so many things that went on before my time, but I associate with what happened at Economy Hall with music, because music was a big part of the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. We used songs like Ray Charles's Get Your Rights, Jack. We say, no, hit the road, Jack. We sang, get your rights, Jack, and don't you be a Tom no more, no more, no more. Get your rights, Jack, and don't be a Tom no more. And different songs, religious songs. Have you been to the jailhouse? Certainly, Lord. Have you been to the jailhouse? Certainly, Lord. Have you been to the jailhouse? Certainly, Lord. Certainly, 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 Lord. Did they give you 30 days? Did they give you 30 days? Oh, did they give you 30 days? Certainly, Lord. Certainly, 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 Lord. Did you do your time? Oh, did you do your time? Oh, did you do your time? Certainly, Lord. Certainly, 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 Lord. Oh, will you go back again? Certainly, Lord. And on and on. And in jail, you had nothing to do all day but sit around. So we took rhythm and blues, gospel and spiritual, any kind of song, and made up freedom songs. And I think that music saved my life many times. In Macomb, Mississippi, November 29, 1961, I was 18 and a half years old. I thought I would never live to see 19. And here I am today. In a couple of months, I'll be 82. And I had hoped that what I did during the civil rights movement would improve what my son and my nieces and nephew would be going through. But I look around today and I say to the young people, it's your time to do it. I'm not going to jail anymore. But I feel today like I got to get out and organize. All that is happening today, here we are at 2025, and you think this was 1950 again. Recently, during the Super Bowl game, I joined a group of young people protesting Donald Trump's appearance here in New Orleans. Our theme was, say it loud and say it clear. Donald Trump is not welcome here. And it was pouring rain. But I did it because I thought, I can't sit back and let what's happening today continue to happen. If the young people's not going to do it, us old folks going to have to do it. And I'm ready. But what we got tricked into, the police, without telling the organizer that the route has been changed, we were supposed to go to the Dome. They came down Rampart, South Rampart Street, up to O'Keefe, and back toward the river. We never got near the dome. But something's got to give. My son is going to be in more trouble than we ever were. But getting back to Economy Hall, because I'm getting all worked up now and ready to organize a protest. Music that was played at Economy Hall for demonstration is the same thing that happened in the 60s. Different music, different time. But music, when I say we were in Macomb, that saved me. When we got into, I did a test ride with Jerome Smith, Alice Thompson, George Raymond, and Tom Valentine and myself to the bus terminal, Greyhound bus terminal in Macomb, Mississippi. When we do these test rides, we had an observer who's Jerome Smith. He got off the bus before us, went in to get our return tickets. The four of us sat at the lunch counter, and George Raymond said to the waitress, "May I have a cup of coffee, please?" She ignored him. Again, George said, "May I have a cup of coffee, please?" Young white Macomb citizen went over to the coffee maker, in big thick cups back then, poured a cup of hot coffee into the cup, walked behind George Raymond, poured the hot coffee over his head and hit him in the base of the neck with that. Then they start chasing us. Alice and I sat there. They were chasing Tom Valentine and George Raymond. At that point, they didn't know that Jerome was part of the group. But when he motioned for Alice and I to come sit in the waiting room, all hell broke loose. They started beating Jerome with brass knuckles. Jerome is 85 now. Is he 86? He's going to be 86. Still suffer from that beating all those years ago. And I sat there. I always took a notepad, writing what was happening and singing in my head, "We are not afraid," and writing what was going on. When we finally got out of there and was taken to the black section of the community and treated by Dr. Anderson, Jerome turned to me and said, "Get Bobby Kennedy on the phone." And I say, "Man, you had one too many hits." So he called out this number. Up until 3 years ago, I always thought that was Bobby Kennedy's direct line, but it was Bert Marshall's number. When that number came in and it was from Macomb, it was patched in directly to Attorney General Bobby Kennedy. And I'd say to him, "May I speak?" I thought it was a receptionist. I said, "May I speak to Attorney General Bobby Kennedy?" He said, "This is he." I say, "My name is Dorotha Smith, and I'm calling for Jerome Smith." He said, "I'm aware of the situation. There are FBI agents out front waiting to take you back to New Orleans." Being all of 18 and a half, I said, "Oh, no, they won't. We're going back to New Orleans the way we came, by bus." There were 10, not one, not two, 10 FBI agents in that terminal that didn't do a thing. I'm sorry to get off on this, but, people need to know stuff that happened. Like we need to know all the stuff that she wrote about from the journals that her dad, bless his heart. But Like I say, I may be ready for another march, but it's something we have to do.
Yes,
And I'm
ma'am.
sorry to get off course, but like I say, I was 18 and a half, and in May 30th, 2025, I'll be 82 years young.
Yes. So I'm going to ask one more question and then open it up to you all. They would prefer that you use a mic for your questions. So if you have them, could you start lining up like over there, and they'll bring a mic to the line. And while you all form a line, I will ask my last question. And it is for David. One of the things, thinking about music and freedom, the thing that fascinates me the most about the exhibit at the Jazz Museum is a piece by Basile Barres, who you mentioned on page 307. And you say that in the book, she says, a composer who'd been formerly enslaved. The exhibit says he is the first enslaved person in 1860 to ever hold copyright on a musical composition. And I'm like, how does one apply for copyright if one is enslaved? I have so many questions. How do you get that? So can you tell us how he got copyright in 1860 at 16 years old while enslaved?
Basile Barres, the person who was his owner, ran a music store on Royal Street. And so Basile learned to fix pianos, he learned to play piano, and after we were emailing back and forth about this, so I kind of looked it up and did some research, and what I found, there was a great researcher named Lester Sullivan, who probably some of you may have known, who worked at the archive at Xavier, who did some research on this and wrote about it. And what he found out was, what he surmised was that Basile Barres applied for copyright in 1860 as a 16-year-old enslaved person. And somehow, the New Orleans person who did copyrights just simply missed it, that he was an enslaved person, and gave him the copyright. So he got the copyright, and it was 1860. So we were asking before, did he get royalties? How did this all work? And I can't think that there were a whole lot of royalties, and whether an enslaved person could get royalties in 1860, I'm not sure, but he probably not. We would think. The person who owned him probably got them, but within 5 years, Basile Barres was not an enslaved person anymore. So he could get royalties, and he also copyrighted several other compositions that you can find the sheet music for, and there are several CDs out of his music. It is good mid to late 1800s classical piano pieces. So that's how I think he pulled it off. He lived until 1902, and also became quite a famous pianist, and toured Europe and taught here and ran music stores here. So.
And on that note, I'm going to open it up to audience questions.
Before we hear the audience questions, I wanted everybody to just hear a quick example of one of the what some of the music played in Economy Hall actually sounded like. So we have an example of a march that when they would give a grand ball, the members would walk in on this march. It's a very popular song called Gettysburg March. The first part of the song is in 6/8 time. You can feel the marching tempo, and then after that they jazz it up in 4/4 time. So we're going to listen to a little bit of that Gettysburg March.
the Antietam March kind of thing. Am I right in assuming that?
I would think so. You know, some sources that I've seen said that composer is unknown, but just the idea of Gettysburg, I think it was an underground kind of march, because when people march, there was pride in marching and power. So I think that was not a coincidence.
And several of the economy members were in the Union Army too, right?
Yes.
So they were very proud of being in the Union Army. So when they came back, they brought that spirit with them, that spirit of resistance and fighting. Yeah.
Now, we could keep going all night. I've got probably another dozen questions, but do you guys have any questions?
Hands?
While she's going up to the mic,
Oh, I got
Yvette Foker.
oh, okay.
Yvette Foker.
There we go.
So earlier, oh my goodness, this is loud. So earlier, there was a question that was segueing into how music had played into the Reconstruction era of Economy Hall and protest and all of that. And so I just was wondering if we could just have more elaboration on that.
Yes, I can talk to it. The members made that resolution about having a brass band to march, and as I said, many of them were in the Civil War, right? When they came back, they were very proud of their service. They joined the African Union. They were ready for voting rights. There was a big mass meeting for voting rights. So by Reconstruction era, in fact, some of the things Ms. Doty was talking about were done 100 years earlier. There were lawsuits. There were people who went to Charles Sauvanet, who was a member of the Economy Society, sued a restaurant for not serving him, right, in the 1860s or 1870s. Anyway, the music that they played, those marches, they decided everything that they did, they would go out with a band. So everything that they did. So, and in some cases, there was some march that I remember that was at night that had lanterns, and there were more than 200 people marching behind a band in show of solidarity and their rights to be Americans. So they were after the Civil War, they were like into being Americans. They wanted their full rights as Americans, right? Which lasted in that period during Reconstruction. So there were lots of meetings, mass meetings for suffrage. There were meetings to help the Freedmen Aid Society, to help freedmen there. There were people who were in the economy who worked in the Republican schools, So there was that whole movement, and it went along with music. Every time they would do it with a brass band. So to talk about their school, they would raise money for schools with dances, right? So yeah, so it was they were all intertwined.
Hands? Oh, I'm going to do him and then come to you.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody. So the question that I have, so much of what we're talking about today, from what I understand, by the way, also I've used your book on my radio show before to talk about the origins of brass bands and mutual aid and social aid and pleasure clubs and so on and so forth. So thank you for your work. I've used it a few times. Actually, we co-hosted a show for many years and referenced your work many times. So thank you. The question that I have, this is for the broader panel or anyone who feels particularly called to answer it, is given a lot of the economic realities about current New Orleans culture, social, so on and so forth, what would you say are some pathways forward for us to start once again building economic solidarity with each other, building movements together? What are some pathways forward that you see that can essentially lift all of us together at the same time? Because as you know, many of us going through some very hard times right now.
Ooh, that's a whole other panel.
I'm going to say something. There are boycotts right now, so you can just boycott some of those big places and spend locally, spend with your local people. That is what the people in the Economy Society did. They patronized each other. If they had a house to build, they'd ask one of their brothers to help them build the house. They would hire each other. They hired each other for their jobs, and they patronized each other's businesses. So we can start there instead of going to corporate America, who's not so nice lately.
So
so I'll go with the rest of them here.
I think one of the greatest weapons of change in positive directions is education. And I recently retired from education after 43 years.
For retirement.
I thought he was yaying because I'm not going to play anymore. But one of the things that I see that has me really disgusted, and I hate to say that, but is education has changed quite a lot in this country in the last few years, and it seems that they're creating smart, dumb people. And I think we have a lot of people that don't know and don't understand and don't care about history. So we get into situations where people make judgments and vote without knowing what the hell they're doing. All you have to do, there was a great program on PBS last night about fascism in Germany and how Hitler came to power and what happened before, during, and after. If you don't want to go there, look at America, look at the Civil War. Who was getting shot to pieces fighting for God knows what because they thought they were changing? It wasn't the massive slave owners or their children. It was the dumb poor people who thought they... No. Education is very important, but what I'm finding is people are smart in terms of computers and things like that, but in terms of understanding history, thinking critically, I think education has taken a downside and doing a disservice. So I think that many of us need to move toward what you're saying is find ways of educating people so that they can learn how to think critically and think for themselves and not be suckers for foolishness. Because there's too much of that out there. And, I'm disgusted with education now. I still believe in it. I still fight for it on individual levels. I help people when I can. Money is not even involved in it. But the problem is I find too many people lack the education to even think about coming together in ways to make positive change. So I think that's an important step.
Yes.
I was just going to say, the other thing, and this is something that from reading the book and reading about Economy Hall and the economies, is that you have to look out for your community, you have to look out for your brothers and your sisters and your fathers and your sons and mothers and daughters, and I say that as a physical relation, but also as a metaphor. That is how the folks in Economy Hall made it through very difficult times.
Yes.
That it seems like we are starting to go through, and to read the book not only as an example of okay, how did they do it? How are we going to do it? What can we learn from them? And I just want to say the other thing that you also can get from reading the book and looking at Economy Hall, Fatima, thank you for writing this in this way. It's an entire, at least to me, alternate history of New Orleans.
Yes.
The New Orleans history that in the 3 decades I've lived here, have been getting was not this. And it's starting to come, and this, what actually happened is starting to be talked about, it's starting to be memorialized between kind of the civil rights markers, between the statues coming down, between this book. You're getting actually a history of what did happen versus what was, and I use this term very deliberately, whitewashed. Whitewashed and what we've all kind of been taught. I wasn't taught about, the Battle of Liberty Place. I wasn't taught about.
None of us.
The Mechanics Battle.
Mechanics Hall.
Mechanics Hall. All of that. Read the book, learn that actual history, talk to people about it. I think Economy Hall can be an example, one of many, of how to possibly make it through the next couple of years if things continue the way it looks like they're going.
So I'm getting the signal that we're at time, so maybe one more? And
Are we at time? Or we have 5?
we got 5?
Yeah, right. I have one here and one here, so we're going to be,
We'll be brief.
thank you.
Okay.
Good evening. So I would ask anyone on the panel to help recreate a night at Economy Hall. Where was it? What time did it start? What was the environment? It wasn't air conditioned, so it must have been very hot in there. Was it very crowded? Was there a lot of dancing? Just tell us a little bit what the atmosphere was like in Economy Hall.
Okay, so I'm going to be real quick on it. There's a page in my book that tells you exactly that.
And the page number is?
She knows the page number, but really, it depends on the era, right? So in the early era, it was Monday night, 7 p.m. Windows open, windows closed, depends on the time of year, and then different things going on with Michael's period, right? The jazz eras, right?
Yes.
They'd go till 4 a.m. or something like that, right?
Yes, so people danced to music. If you could play a little bit of example number 6, Sam Morgan's jazz band, recorded in 1927. It was one of the most popular dance bands in New Orleans, and they did not travel up north like King Oliver and Louis Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton, but they stayed home, and these recordings are extremely important to show what dance jazz music was like. Sam Morgan's band made the first recorded hymns in the up-tempo jazz style, and this is one of the songs, one of their original songs that they played. So this is a little bit of it. Short dress gal, let's go. And you can only imagine what that meant. So people dance to music like this in a crowded hall in the 1920s.
Which is we have some little snacks and nibbles outside, so we can also continue the conversation out there.
Thanks to the person who raised the question about New Orleans and the United States now. Dodie, I think, can speak to this particularly, but economic boycotts work. Economic boycotts begat the civil rights movement. Montgomery, what you all did on Dryad Street, what you did on Canal Street. The success there compelled a lot of changes between the races in New Orleans. Here and now, we can do anything. We're 8 billion people around this world. We don't have to be under the heel of Donald Trump. We can do whatever we want. We can buy whatever we want. We don't have to buy from Elon Musk. We don't have to take it from any of them. All we have to do is unite and begin to act in concerted fashion for each other. I think everybody should exchange emails who's here tonight, who is conscious of what Economic Hall means, and then just gather either digitally or virtually or whatever, but do something. Do something next week, and they'll back away. They're cowards and bullies. And New Orleans is the most revolutionary place in the United States, still.
And I think that idea of uniting to really affect change and coming together is the spirit of Economy Hall, because that's what they were doing when they were founded. That's what they were doing until the doors closed, was uniting to affect change.
Before we close, I would like for Yvette Boca to stand up. She still performs out at the Jazz Fest in the Economy Hall as part of the Fister Sisters. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes. But Holly is who I wanted to introduce.
Thank you, and I just want to know when the New Benevolent Society is being formed. Sign me up. Every demonstration is really great.
Yes.
Yes.
That would be a great idea.
And yes, and you can also catch Dr. Michael White at the Jazz Festival in Economy Hall, not Cheapskate Hall.
Sign us all up. Thank you all so much for being here. Let's continue the conversation outside. Thank you to the panelists.